Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration web seminar, which is entitled Providing Device Support that Improves Student Safety and Access During COVID, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsors, including Acer for Education, Google for Education, as well as Intel. Before we get started, I would like to share just a few housekeeping items with you before getting started. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then please select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and then type in your message if you're having any technical issues, and I'll get back to you shortly. If you don't have computer speakers or if you prefer to listen privately, please dial the phone number and access code that I will be posting in the chat window in a few minutes following this brief introduction. For today's web seminar, we'll also be welcoming any questions you have today with a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. To submit a question, please use the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen, and send all your questions to all panelists, which should be the default option. If for whatever reason you don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, just quickly look to the right side of your screen once again and click on the expand triangle, which is directly in front of the panel name, to make sure you have access to it. Also, one last thing to note before we begin: if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you'll be pleased to note that everyone who registered and who is attending today will receive an email with a link to the slides as well as an archived recording. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you all our speaker for today, who is David Liss from Nixa Public Schools. David is the Executive Director of Technology, as well as his district's Comprehensive School Improvement Plan. Hi, David. Nice to have you with us today.
Steve, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. All right. Well, Steve, thank you for the great introduction, and just want to let you all know that if you don't know where Nixa is kind of in the south central region of Missouri. We are the only Nixa in the world, which is kind of interesting. And if you're a fan of any of the Bourne movies, Jason Bourne was born in Nixa. Of course, it's all fictitious, but it kind of surprised all of us when we were watching it too, that was mentioned. So that's kind of a little bit about Nixa. Today, we're going to be talking about how COVID really changed, or how we adapted to our support to what COVID offered us. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to just share a little bit of background. There will be a lot of meat in the middle to end of really how we adapted to it. But I think it's important that everyone understands kind of what our district is, how we're comprised, and kind of what our practices are, because it's really instrumental to know not just what we're doing, but how that bore out of what we were doing. And so just as a way of a few district demographics, we're about 55 square miles, which isn't large but isn't small. We have 6,500 students and about 700 staff. We span 12 school buildings, and when I say that, educational buildings doesn't include any of our other support buildings that we have. And then I'll explain this soon. You know, why would you have 10,000 student devices for 6,500 students? I'll explain that here in just a second. We are fully seated right now. We did have, with an option of a virtual option if they chose to. We have about 900 students out of our 6,500 that chose to go virtual, and that did, it added to the complexity of our support. So I hope that this presentation will benefit those that are seated, those that are virtual, and those that are hybrid. And to kind of let you know about how we're doing things here, K-5, we are synchronous. So we're using Zoom. It's just like a classroom. We have 18 virtual teachers that they show up in their classroom every day. They have, they're using their laptop with a large screen TV, and they are teaching to usually between 18 and 20 kids, again, in their grade level, and everybody's on, and they're on for 5 to 6 hours a day. So it's just like they're teaching, it's just virtual. In our 6 through 12 classes, those are asynchronous. We're using Canvas, and we have some curriculum platforms that we're using there. But that's just kind of where we are and what we're doing. From a tech standpoint, we do have about 10,000 devices. In January, we life cycled 2,000 of our devices in 9/12, and we're using the Acer 752Ts, the flip back model, the newer version of that, and we were using 738s before then, and we just life cycled another 2,000 in grades 5 through 8, which again plays into our story. And we just did that here in September and October. Our K4s, that is about the 2,500, they're still on 738Ts. And I tell you this for a reason, because we'll talk about how those numbers and the inventory that we had plays into our ability to support some of these. So why do we have 10,000 devices? Well, it's because we had 6,500 devices and we just life cycled 4,000. So we do have all of those on hand. So it gives us about 10,500 devices. So as you can see, of the 4,000, what I would call extra, about 3,200 of those are usable. We have 800 of those, and it's not like that they don't work at all, but ones that students turned in that had significant damage, we put in the salvage, kind of on salvage shelves, and what we're doing is we're breaking those down to use for parts to fix our other 738Ts. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, what about students taking them home? So this is kind of our model. 5 through 12, they take them home. So those are more susceptible to damage, and our K4s are classroom carded. And again, I give you that information because when I explain some things a little later, it will be very instrumental for you to know that that's kind of what our demographic is there. So what is kind of our demographics of support? In our elementary and intermediate buildings, we have a media aid that they do teach. They teach one of our specials, and so they are teaching during the day, but they do have some release time, and they run our help desk. And so when students have problems with their Chromebook in the normal, and this is what I'm just saying, just normal school pre-COVID, they would just simply take their Chromebook down to the help desk, and they would get with the media aid during a time when they were available, and they would get the media aid would take a look at it and see if there's anything that they could do to fix it. If they can't, then they would simply give them a loaner, and they would stack those up, and the building tech would check a day or two, once or twice a day to grab those Chromebooks, go back, fix them, and then they would bring them back, and we would take the loaner back and give them their other one. You're going to see how this changes a little bit after COVID on our virtual, but our idea is that we had a lot of, and I won't say a lot, but we did have damage that it seemed to be that students would be, well, if I take it down to the help desk, I'll just get a new one. So we felt like personal responsibility was very important, and we continued to give them back their same Chromebook. So they knew that it didn't matter if they turned it in for repair. They're not getting a different one. They're getting a new. And when I say they're not getting a different one, they're getting their same one back. So take care of it. Similar at the junior high school, we have a media aid there. This media aid does not teach. They are full-time. So to give you an idea, each elementary school has roughly 500 kids. Again, with that teaching media aid, our junior high has right at 1,000. So we have a full-time media aid there that runs the help desk, is there all the time. Same procedure of kids bringing it down, getting a swap, and building tech fixing it, and then us getting their device back. And then it is almost identical at the high school. You're going to see that I really like symmetry, and I like consistency. And so we do have a help desk there where there is a teacher who runs. We have several classes of students that are learning technical support and that sort of thing. And so he runs the help desk there, but we also incorporate student repair there. These students actually go through a course that has been approved by Acer so that they can do repair. that falls within the acceptable limits of our contract with Acer. And so just to let you know that not only the help desk technicians will do that repair, but at the high school we have students doing repair as well. And we do have a building tech for that building that helps out also. So that's our processes. And again, that's going to be instrumental in how we did things post-COVID. So what is that normal? Oh, I guess I actually already covered this as I was going through this. But again, that student takes it to the help desk, gets a loaner. We put in the work. This is another part, but the media aid would put in the work order, or the help desk technician would put in the work order. Building techs repair, return it to the building, and then they would swap it back. Now, I did want to include on here that we do charge students for what we would call intentional damage, and that would be any kind of spills, any kind of intentional damage as far as even if it's accidental, but it's pretty blatant if we have a whole corner chipped off or something like that. And so it's not all charges, all things get charged, but if there is any charges necessary, then the media aid would process that claim for that family. And so from that perspective, what happens is this is how we were rolling. This is, I think about a year ago today, this is just how we were rolling, had no idea that COVID was just months upon us. And so as we were rolling, then we hit this coronavirus. And the funny thing is that we did hear, I don't know about wherever you are, but we did hear kind of that this thing was coming, this pandemic, pandemic could potentially be on the way, and it was hit just before our spring break. And so we did react a little bit just before spring break, and it actually helped us a little bit, but it also created a nightmare, which I'll explain here in just a second. So this is really where we get into the meat of wanted to kind of get through all of that really quick to get into the meat of what we're talking about today. So what was our response to virtual? Just before spring break, we had heard some things like I was saying, and we thought, you know what, we don't know how this thing's going to pan out. And as I rely back on the slides that I had showed you before, grades 5 through 12 already had their Chromebooks. They're going to go home with their Chromebooks over spring break. They're going to have devices. But since we are a one-to-one district and we want to do as much with that one-to-one technology as we can through the educational curriculum, we were thinking, well, what happens if we don't come back right after spring break? And so what we did is we went ahead and sent Chromebooks home in grades 3 and 4. And I might preface, I'm going to step back for just a second, seeing that I've really kind of flown through those other slides. I'm going to step back for a second to let you know that when we first started our one-to-one program called our Connected Initiative, when we first started that in 2016, all Chromebooks went home. We sent all Chromebooks home, kindergarten through 12th grade. It was about 2 years in that we said, as we're watching the benefits of this versus the pain that it creates for parents and students and maturity level and things like that, we pulled it back to CART, kindergarten through 2nd grade. And then last year, I think it was a year ago, previous to the COVID year, we said, you know what, I think that we're just going to go ahead and CART grades 3 and 4 as well. And there were some curricular reasons for that. There was a lot of reasons of the teachers. We really encourage our teachers to only use devices for what the devices bring benefit to the curriculum, not necessarily the idea of using it for everything in the curriculum. So we were finding that there wasn't that much that the students were doing, taking them home, yet kids were using them for other things. And, we don't allow any kind of social media. We don't allow all the SIPA stuff. So we don't allow YouTube or Netflix or anything like that. But they were finding other games and things to play. And so we started getting some feedback from parents that these really aren't being used necessarily appropriately at home, and why are you sending them home? So we went ahead and carted grades 3 and 4 in the 18-19 school year. And so just to understand that those are all in carts right now. Well, part of that is that we took all those back in, and not only Chromebooks but chargers. So then we had to wire these carts. So a lot of this plays into what I'm getting ready to say. So we rewire all these carts with the chargers for the Chromebooks. Well, what happens is we sent these Chromebooks home in 3rd and 4th grade. Well, lo and behold, we sent all the Chromebooks home. Guess what we forgot to do? We didn't send chargers home. And so while they had them, they used them all during spring break, and now all these Chromebooks are dead. Call that your moment of not your best decision, but that's just kind of what it was. So what we did is then we also saw, once COVID hit, that all those 3rd and 4th graders had those Chromebooks, but our kindergarten through 2nd did not have anything. So we started looking at paper packets. We started looking at all those kinds of things, and we realized that we really needed to react by creating a pickup for grades K through 2. And so we began doing that. Now, here was this is what kind of gets into the debacle that you'll see here in a minute, that in grades 3 through 4, those Chromebooks went home, and each teacher added to a Google Sheet which child had which Chromebook. So from an inventory standpoint, all of our Chromebooks are checked out to carts. But the teacher added the child's name to the Google Sheet with the asset tag number, but we didn't have it in our inventory system. Well, when we handed out to K2, we did inventory and check these out to individual students. Just leave that in the back of your mind for when I get to the next slide. So we ended up getting Chromebooks into the hands of many K2. It was optional. If they didn't have internet access or if they didn't want a Chromebook at home, we did do paper packets. And then all those 3rd and 4th graders have those Chromebooks that we also had to pick up for chargers so that they could get chargers for them. We did not want to break down our carts for those chargers, so we took the chargers we had on hand, and we asked that any families that had multiple children with Chromebooks that they only have one charger per family. So then we started looking at, we've got all these Chromebooks out. We have 6,500 Chromebooks out, and we don't have them in school every day. Now they're just out. How do we set up a response system to support that virtual learning? And just like many of you, you probably scrambled figuring out what in the world we're going to do. So what we did is we tried to figure out what our contact points were. All of our contact points are, for the most part, going to be non-physical because of the way COVID was playing out. So we did create an email address. We already had one, but we made that available to parents. And we also initiated one of our phone lines simply for contact points for support. We centralized our support out of the tech center, which obviously changed things because all these media aides and everybody else, they're all at home. Everybody's virtual. But we were considered essential employees, and we still continued to work out of the tech center. So we centralized all of our support for the district out of the tech center. And then we set up a process of, if you email or you phone in, then you would be able to come in, bring your device in, drop it off. We would then clean it because, as we all are and were, very concerned with passing COVID, and that's kind of my concerns there. Our technicians were very concerned about their exposure to COVID through those devices, and we were also equally as concerned with transferring COVID through the devices, either back to the parent or student, et cetera. So we had a cleaning procedure that was very thorough, and I'll talk even more about how we ramped that up here in just a minute. But we set up a process, and at that time, we did not have those 2,000 extra Chromebooks. That's why I said it would play into our story. But those 2,000 that came in September, October, we didn't have those. So we were very tight on the number of Chromebooks we had. And so we actually did a what I call a dual a dual touch, which means they brought it in, we cleaned it, we repaired it, and then we got back with them so they could come back and pick up that device. Again, that'll play out here in just a second about how we responded as we came back to school. But I reiterate that those concerns were the technician and family exposure through devices. We had a big concern about that student tracking in grades 3-4, which I had mentioned. Those were all in Google Sheets, but we had to somehow transfer that from not only them being assigned to a cart in a building, but now being assigned to students. And then also having enough devices. Remember what I was saying about not having enough? Well, when we started handing out to K2, we used a lot of those extras that we had from the high school. When we did the 2000 life cycle at the high school, it gave us some extra, and we did not want to emptying our K2 carts, well, we could have, but we decided to take the ones that we had at the high school from that life cycle in January, and we used those. Now, for those of you who understand all of the back end of Google and Chromebooks and all of that kind of stuff, you know that a high school OU and what they have access to and all the rules and everything are different than what kindergarten through second graders get. So we had the task of not only assigning those, but we also had to move those from into a proper OU so that students would have the right access to the right materials. So when we talk about this setup, process, and drop-off, I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so when we talk about dropping off and cleaning and repairing, I'd like to show you a couple pictures here. And we have a media drop-off, and we put that in place. We purchased this for about $2,500, got it in. We had already had a payment box for another program that we had, so we just poured a pad and put them both on the same side. That's our tech center behind us. And so in a central location, we padded that thing really well, and it fits a Chromebook just perfectly. And we asked parents, we do not. So what we did was we minimized, remember I said that 2 point of contact thing early on. We said, bring it into the tech center. We'll get it from you. We repair it, clean it, repair it, and get it back. Because of that risk of exposure, what we asked them to do is we said, now what we would like for you to do not turn, unless you're turning it in because you're leaving the district, just turn in the Chromebook. Don't turn in the charger. We've got chargers. So unless it was a charger issue. We asked them to seal the Chromebook in a bag, either in like a freezer bag or a plastic Walmart sack was fine. And we asked them to just put it into the media drop. We would check the media drop daily. And if you remember back then, and I think that some of the CDC guidelines have kind of kept this pretty much the same, but they were saying that the virus typically only lives about 36 hours on plastic. So what we were doing at this time, and the picture to the right shows that we took one of our tables in our foyer and we simply divided it up by Monday through Friday. And so what we would do is all of the Chromebooks that we would receive on that day, we would stack up in that area, and then 3 days later, we would work on that stack. We would still get them out of the bags, so we would work with gloves, we would work with masks or shields. I don't even know if shields were a thing then, but definitely with masks. And we would clean them thoroughly after 3 days, and then we would work on them. Then we would clean them thoroughly again, and we would get them ready for pickup. So then it was a single point pickup from the standpoint of two people seeing each other, and the 1 point would just be of the drop-off. So then there was more information that was coming out about COVID. And this is kind of interesting because what we found was we were seeing a lot of, or not, I won't say a lot, but we were finding that there was this idea that UV lighting killed the virus. And we later found out through some research that it wasn't just any UV lighting, but certain UV lighting killed the virus. And so what we had the wise idea of doing is we were going to build what we called a bake box. And so we could bake them. And so this is a schematic of from one of my technicians. And as you can see here, it uses 10 UV lamps, and those UV lamps cost about $50 a piece at that time because a capitalistic society takes advantage when they can. So we went ahead and we ordered the lamps, which, by the way, have yet to come in. But we ordered the 10 lamps, and we had this design of this box. And I know you guys don't know me, but on the weekends, if you see the jacket and tie kind of guy on the weekdays, but on the weekends, you're going to see me at my property and in my shop with a cutoff T-shirt. I love to build stuff, and I like that kind of thing. And so I was just going to build this box with the help of some of my staff, and we were going to use this as what we called our bake box. About the time that we were doing this and we were ordering the bulbs, we realized how back ordered they were. When they would come in stock, nobody knew. We weren't able to get the main part of this box that we needed. And so we just continued to clean like we would normally clean with different cleaners, obviously staying away from screens and things like that because we use touch screens and we didn't want to damage those. Want to keep everything within warranty specs. And it was very interesting that when you start giving your employees the ability to think outside the box, so to speak, excuse the pun, it's interesting the things that they will come up with. And this was kind of our aha moment that we did not have kids in school in the spring. And as one of my technicians was going through his building at the junior high, he happened to notice that in our science classrooms, they had these boxes, and these boxes happened to have UV lamps in them. And what they were used for is they were used to sanitize goggles in our science department. And so he got in touch with the science department head and said, hey, would you mind if I used one of these and checked out the lamps to see if they qualify for killing COVID? And so he did, and they said, go for it. We don't really use them that much anyway. And so this is an example of what that box looks like. You may have these in your school district right now or something similar. And we simply borrowed one of them, and we're continuing to borrow it because they don't really need it back. But this gives you an example of kind of what we did to speed up our processes, because now we no longer were concerned with the 3-day wait on getting to Chromebooks. What we would do is, again, with masked up and with gloves on and so forth, we would immediately take those things out of the drop box. We would unbag them. We would bake them. And just to let you know, I don't know if this is, there's any scientificness to this, but what we could find is about 5 minutes. And so because of the way that the lamps are in there, we tent them, as you can see here, and we will bake them on that way so the UV light gets into all the crevices and cracks. And then because we have the flip back model, we're able to tent them opposite as well and bake them. But again, if you had multiple UVs, you could get both sides at the same time, even if you had a clamshell type device. So this takes us through summer. This is what we were doing, and that was our normal process through summer. As the school year opened, and this is not a slide that shows anything more than these are all the videos of a lot of our administrators talking to their kids about coming back seated and trying to relieve anxiety about coming back and so forth. We were the first school in the state in June to bring back kids seated for summer school in our John Thomas School of Discovery, which is a magnet school. And so we had some experience through June, and we felt very prepared to open up August. And I will say, knock on wood, that our numbers had been good enough as far as quarantines and positive COVIDs that we have been able to remain open through the first quarter and anticipate being able to stay open at least through the semester, if not the year. We also have a large number, I'll say large number, we have a number of students that are going to be returning to us seated from virtual just because of their experience with virtual. As probably a lot of your curriculum people know that many students struggle with that. and because of our cleaning regime and the safety that we've been able to provide students and that experience level that many of them are feeling comfortable coming back. So we start school. And as we start school, now it changes the dynamic again. It changes the paradigm of going, okay, we had to really quickly react to going from all seated, to this virtual model through the entire spring and then some during the summer. We did not have a collection of those Chromebook devices at this point. So just know that everything I shared with you about what K2 had, what 3.4 had, and what 5.8 had, they still had them. We did have a drive-by to get the seniors to turn in their Chromebooks, and you'll see here in a minute, still tracking some of those down. But so anyway, so what did that look like when we decided to go with a seated model, and but we still had this pocket of virtual? So first off, inventory, the K4 nightmare. So what we decided to do is we said all of our K4 students, and then to understand that before spring break, third and fourth graders are third and fourth graders. You come back the next year, now third and fourth graders are fourth and fifth graders. And so we still had the nightmare of those fourth grade students that were fourth grade last year that are fifth grade this year. They will keep their devices, where the third graders that are now fourth graders will turn them in. And I won't go into all of the stuff unless you have questions at the end about how we did all that. But the bottom line is that we had all of those students bring their devices back. We did have somebody that I hired to literally go in and do all of third and fourth grade to convert that Google spreadsheet into assigning those students their Chromebook. And then we had, again, a certain number of kids who were in K2 that had Chromebooks and others that didn't. So we were lucky enough, I should say fortunate enough, that we did not break down those K2 carts because we were able to fill in for all the kids who didn't have them out of those K2 carts. It was a nightmare. It was not something I'd like to live over again. But we did. So at this point, we have recarted all K4 students. We verified the 512 students, and we were able to issue new students, both seated and virtual devices. It was very, very thin because we were using from different pockets. Again, we did not have those other 2,000 in yet in September and October, so we were just doing what we had, doing with what we had. So let's talk about support. So how would we react to seated versus virtual? And we had a lot of conversations. Here's what I would say. If you're, regardless of who you are that is listening, but definitely a tech director, you may be on the same page as me, you may not. But I don't like things that are outside of the norm. And when I say outside of the norm, what I mean by that is I don't like doing special things. Because when you start doing special things, then you have to keep up with what is special. And what I mean by that is if I did one way of support and then I said, oh, well, we're going to do this for somebody else and we're going to do it this way for somebody else, and we have 3 or 4 different methods of support, I have to keep up with, and the staff has to keep up with, how are we differentiating between all those? So everything that I did and our team did was trying to keep as true to our normal operations as possible, with as little deviation off of that as possible, so that it was standardized, so it made sense, and so things wouldn't fall through the cracks. So we wanted that seated support to follow the original normal procedures. If you're going to be in the building, we still have everybody back. There's no reason why we wouldn't follow our normal procedures. Then we wanted our virtual because, remember, we had been thrust in, as you were, we were thrust into that virtual supported model over the summer. Well, that virtual supported model, if you'll go back and look at how we did other things, it really modeled the same procedure that we were doing. It's just now we were doing that centrally instead of in the building. So still the process was the same. So since that virtual model had worked for us, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We kind of tweaked some things to make it a little bit better. And then we wanted that virtual model to follow the virtual procedures that we were already familiar with and that parents were already familiar with. And so again, instead of trying to do something new and work through all those kinks, just follow what you're already doing, just augment it a little bit to fit your needs. And then we had some minor changes which focused on minimizing contact for our virtual students, which created a debacle in 5th through 8th. So let me just cover that here for just a second. So when we went with newer machines, the 758Ts in 5 through 8, we literally had those 2,000. I'll give you an example. We had 1,000 of them go to our junior high. We had 996 students at the junior high. We have 1,007 fifth and sixth graders. We had 1,000 devices coming in. You do the math. We're a few devices short, which obviously we could buy. But what we decided to do for some specific reasons is not to upgrade our 738Ts for our virtual students. Our parents of those virtual students raked me over the coals on Facebook and everywhere else because we were not being equitable to those students. Those two, if you're familiar with those two devices, they are virtually identical. One is a little newer, but they didn't like not having the new bling. I get it. But what our focus was is we knew that the majority of the reason that those students and parents had chosen virtual was to minimize their contact. So we, in turn, focused our support on minimizing that contact. So now what we do is when we do support for the virtual, we simply ask them to tell their teacher that they're having a problem. The teacher puts in a work order, and then we can contact the parent to let them know to bring that device in. Well, on the backside, what that does is it lets us know that we have somebody coming. So we immediately assign another Chromebook to that student, which I'm going to go ahead and show these pictures. So I have a couple cabinets full of 738s that are ready to go, power wash ready to go. We simply put them in the right OU. We assign them to the student. And so and you can see on the picture on the right there that they're all just sitting there ready. So when that parent comes in and we don't do appointments, we just simply say, come into the tech center anytime between 8 and 4, Monday through Friday. They come in, they ring the doorbell, we go out, we meet them with masks on. We say, please give us your name. Yes, we walk in, we grab the Chromebook, get the non-working one from them, give them the working one, and they're on their way. Again, because of those numbers, if I had issued those virtual students the 752Ts because I don't have extras, I would have had to have given them a 738 loaner, taken theirs in, repaired it, and then made another point of contact with them to get the 738 back and give them the 752. Made complete logical sense to me, the administration, and the board. It makes logical sense, I think, to about 80% of our virtual parents, but to about 20% of them, I'm not a nice guy. I'll just put it that way. So let me quickly move on and get close to concluding here. What are our remaining concerns? Our remaining concerns are getting Chromebooks back. We have several missing devices. So through all of this debacle, kids that have moved out of the district, I'm assuming, we're running reports right now for kids that have 2 checked out to them. You say, Dave, how could that happen? Well, remember, we handed out those K2s, and then we also had, and I didn't tell you the specifics of it, but we also have those K4 teachers that if a student said, oh, I didn't have a device, they just gave them a device at the beginning of the year. Now we're getting all of our inventory right. That's why I say inventory is so important, is now that our inventory is right, we can go in and we can see what students have 2 devices. The ones in red there, I won't get off on that tangent, but we found one family that had 2 devices. It was a divorce situation, one's at mom's, one's at dad's. And anyway, that was one that we were looking for. It was a lot of fun to go through that one. Not. And then also K4 chargers. So just let know that we are ready to go virtual. If we were to say tomorrow, hey, things have gotten bad and we're going virtual, we're ready. We can just take those Chromebooks out of the carts and hand them to the students. And all K4 are checked out to students individually as well. So where they were assigned to carts, now they're assigned to individual children. And so we can just hand them their device and they can take it home. Problem is that we have all those chargers, all those carts wired with those chargers. And so just to let you know, again, if you look at those numbers, our K4 is 2,500. So we now have to have 2,500 extra chargers to give to those students. And so we're in the process of, through that life cycle, of trying to get chargers together to put into, and we actually have created these packs that if we go virtual, then we just have these, they're like Walmart sacks that are just ready to send home to kids. They don't have chargers in them right now, but we're wanting to get chargers in them. But as you know, having a bunch of your inventory just tied up in a bag hanging on the wall isn't really, the best situation. And then I would say our remaining concerns is still that 5-8 debacle with the virtual parents. They're not happy about it. But I put a couple graphs in there. You probably can't see the numbers, but the big pieces of the pie are my 5th through 8th buildings. Now, on the other hand, when we look at on the left one, and that just shows you damage and repair. Another thing that went into that decision was we were deciding that in 5th through 8th, we had the majority of our damage. And if they're seated, again, this isn't the reason, but it's another reason that we made the decision not to give the newer devices out to the virtual students, since they have the same functionality, is that we see these devices day to day. And if they're not being taken care of, we can say, take that to the help desk or whatever. But we're not seeing the virtual ones day to day. And in those grades where damage is at the highest, we want to keep a look on the asset and be a good steward of our taxpayer money. If you look at the graph on the right, the big purple one, that's unpaid claims. I mean, the whole thing is unpaid claims. The purple is our high school. Take that out of the picture. The rest is all 5 through 8, and those are our unpaid claims. So not only do we have a lot of claims in 5-8, we also, most of those claims, or I'm not going to say most, many of those claims go unpaid. So it becomes something that becomes a liability to the district. So finally, in wrapping up, I would just say, what are our lessons learned? I would say whatever you do, especially in times like this, you need to react quickly. So as you and see these sound like it's counterproductive, but when you react quickly, be slow and take your time to think clearly. A lot of times when we react out of haste. And I would say react quickly, but no faster than you can make clear decisions. Also, be methodical. Use existing practices as a guide. I come back to the same thing I said before. If you've found that your existing practices of support are working, then use those practices. Everybody's already familiar with it. Use it as a guide and only augment the pieces you need to make it work for your situation. Also, do not shortcut inventory and accountability. You've heard my story. You've heard my story on the lack of accountability with the 3rd and 4th, the K4 or K3, K2, sorry. All of that, and then all the headaches that brought. Make sure that you have a good inventory established ahead of time, and that you track things for good accountability, because when you have to do it on the backside, it's a real pain. Also, I learned really to listen constructively to my creative thinkers and dreamers. A lot of, I will say there's a lot of things that they gave to me that just seemed like, oh, wow, that's pie in the sky. But the thing is, if you don't go through that kind of stuff, you're not going to find those great ideas. And I was just listening to Brene Brown today talk about vulnerability. If you don't know Brene Brown, just look up. She's got a lot of stuff on vulnerability, great TED Talk and so forth. But the one thing that you have to have in your organization, if you want your staff to think creatively and be innovative, is you have to establish a culture of vulnerability. And so, because vulnerability in and of itself is to think, try, fail, try, and try again. And so if you don't have that culture, you're not going to have those creative thinkers. You've got to empower them. And it talks, and I would just say you listen to a lot of ideas that are not, you can't realize, but you're going to find a piece of gold in that, in them Nar Hills if you allow it to happen. Also collaborate with other districts, especially local districts. Find out what other districts are doing. Some of the things they do may be working, maybe not working. They may work for you, may not. And don't just assume because it's working in another district that it'll work with yours. And the one thing I would say is get involved. Get involved with your local organizations, state organizations, whether it be COSIN or other organizations like that, because the more you're involved, the more contacts you'll have as you go forward with collaboration with other districts, again, locally or in the state or even internationally for that matter. Don't be afraid of responsible risk-taking. That is the mother of invention. Comes back to listening to those ideas and trying some things. Don't be afraid to try new things. I do say responsible risk-taking. And then, of course, effective communication is essential. I use that in all caps because it's got to be effective. Just communicating is not important enough. You've got to make it effective because people are not going to read all your emails. They're not going to read your things that you put out to them. We have things like quick news and things like that. They're not going to listen to all of your video. And so you have to communicate early and communicate often. And that is to all of your stakeholders. Do not make assumptions when it comes to communication. Communicate and communicate over again. And that is to your students and parents or guardians. But I found it's also important to community members. We're a very tight-knit community, but our community needs to understand what we're doing because they have to understand how we're using the resources that they've provided for us. And then, of course, your teachers, administrators, and don't forget your board members. A lot of, if we don't communicate effectively, I've had board members come up to me and go, what are we doing? Because I'm getting these parents telling me the 5-8 debacle. Yeah, they heard it from a parent before they heard it from me. I should have communicated what was going on to them prior to them hearing it from a parent and having to get information from me. So that would be my lessons learned and my suggestions as we go through. And Steve, I would say that I'm ready for questions, or if there's anything in the Q&A from anybody who has anything for me.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you again, David, for your insights and for sharing everything that your district has learned in this area. I really do appreciate it. And like you just said, we do have some time now for Q&A where David will answer any questions that you may have. For those of you who have not yet submitted a question, you can please do so now by submitting it in the Q&A panel, which should be located below the chat panel at the bottom of your screen. If it's not showing up, you can just look at the very bottom, the right-hand side of your screen. There should be 3 dots. If you click on that, it should pop up a new menu that says Q&A. Perfect. So we do have a question that came in. So this person is asking, what were the criteria under consideration for making the decision on the various methods of instruction at your district? So that includes virtual, asynchronous, synchronous.
Yeah, great question. We took into consideration, and it wasn't, we have obviously like most school districts do, a superintendent's cabinet, and I'm fortunate enough to be on that cabinet. So we have technology represented. We also have curriculum instruction, elementary, secondary, special education, et cetera. And so we made that collective decision based on our students' best interest. We looked at what we felt like was a very watered down attempt at education in the spring. We were worried about what all of us have heard termed as the COVID slide into the fall. Again, it was very enlightening to us as we gave it a try, just gave it a good try in summer school to have seated. We tried a couple different methods. We tried methods with social distancing. We tried methods of an A/B schedule. And so we looked at what worked, what didn't work, how students were feeling about things. But again, the one thing that I would say that was a driver on this is what are our infection numbers and our quarantine numbers, because that played into it. It played into it what our county was experiencing and our community. And we were rather low in the beginning, which allowed us the opportunity to think through coming back seated. But we had data to support that seated model of schooling was far superior for the students' education than the virtual model. That has since played out through our first quarter and going into our next quarter. As we look at the data, and we're very data-driven here in Nixa, it supports that assumption. And so, again, I don't want to say, like, don't think, and don't take me as saying that we were careless by any means, but we were more concerned with the students' education and willing to be that responsible risk-taking and make sure their cleaning is good and all that kind of stuff, than we were just to keep them home so that we would keep them away from any potential exposure and risk their education. And I will tell you that it could have come out the other way, but we're finding that all of our data supports that we made a good decision, again, for our area.
Great. Thank you. That's great advice. Thanks again. So it looks like that was our only question that we had submitted. So with that said, I'd just like to say, David, thank you again for all of your insights. We really appreciate your time here today at DA and our audience as well, for sure. And I would also like to thank our attendees for joining us today. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news as well as trends, in addition to current issues in K through 12. Our wide range of readers to District Administration subscribe for free to our magazine and stay up to date with us through our print magazine, in addition to the digital edition of that magazine, our e-newsletters, including DA Daily, and our web seminars like this one. Also, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again, or maybe for those of you who believe that the solutions that David provided in this web seminar would be helpful to your colleagues and at your district, you will be pleased to know that an archive recording of this web seminar will be available at the URL, which you can find on your screen right here. You can also expect to receive an email from our team at DA later tomorrow, I should say, excuse me, which will include a link to all of the slides that you saw. And so with that, on behalf of District Administration, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your school year. Take care, be well, and be safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me.
Great.